The whole world is dissolving, and we're foaming at the mouth and accusing our fellow men. Woe to you, hypocrites, scribes and Pharisees, because you're resembling whitewashed tombs, which on the outside appear beautiful, but on the inside are full of dead bones and all uncleanness. Now, let's remember that the ancient Hebrews were very often going to the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem, and many of them used to take very long trips, and we know that, most people at that time lived around, 30 or 40 years old, and beyond that, they were lucky. Of course, they didn't have the medicines that we had today, but along the road, when they had passed away, they would be buried along the road, on the banks of the road, and they would be whitewashed. The tombs were whitewashed. And that's why it said, outside you appear beautiful and whitewashed tombs, but inside, of course, all these are full of dead bones. Now, the worst enemy of Christian orthodoxy are the pious who do not experience the faith, says the Bishop of Limassol, Athanasius of Cyprus. God calls us to live the faith, to experience it and put it into practice in our daily lives. On the contrary, there are some who claim to defend the Christian Orthodox faith, when in reality they have not understood its depth. The lack of this experiential experience creates a distorted image of Christian Orthodoxy, which causes great harm. According to St. John Chrysostom, there's nothing easier than to judge others, but nothing more dangerous than to judge. The problem of pious people who criticize others arises when these individuals do not understand that true faith has nothing to do with condemning one's neighbor, but with unconditional love for him. They consider themselves defenders of the faith, but in reality they distance it from its true nature. Orthodoxy is not an ideology or a collection of doctrines to be protected, but a life in the love of God. Now, if we see, of course, something that's wrong in our church, we should not keep it to ourselves. We should go to our Father Confessor and our spiritual father and tell him what's going on, and he will guide us as to what we should do. Because there are times when things are not properly going as Christ's code that was given to us as to how a proper church should be run. So when we see something, we should take care of the problem so it doesn't become a gangrene or a cancer and become a bigger problem. We don't hate the person, we hate the sin. Now, going back to this, whoever loves God also loves his neighbor, says St. John the theologian, reminding us that true love for God cannot exist without being manifest towards other people. God's love is not limited to the personal relationship with Christ, but also spread towards each of our brothers. Thus, a person who truly loves God cannot reject, judge, or condemn his neighbor. On the contrary, love for his neighbor is a proof of true love of God. Now, let's remember, if you read the Holy Bible, especially the New Testament, you'll have many times when you'll find, even in 1 Corinthians, Apostle Paul tells us that there were scandals against him. He was slandered by people that were of the church. And even the beloved disciple of Christ, St. John the theologian, in the Epistle of John, I think it's John 1, he tells us that there were people of the priests of the church that were lying concerning him and his disciples. And they were blocking his ordinance, his work, his apostolic work. And even though that they knew he was a beloved disciple, the beloved disciple of Christ, can you imagine? Now, St. Paisius referred to people who judge, said, whoever judges others at first thinks he's doing good, but later he sees that he himself is being corrupted. When we do not experience faith and do not let God's love transform us, we end up failing and moving away from the will of God. Criticism, imputation, and isolation of others are nothing more than expressions of our personal weakness and our inner unsatisfied desires. And again, I'm telling you, because it's exactly what many of us do experience. When you see something in the church that is not right, you have to take care of it. If Jesus Christ allows you to see it, it's because people of his own are re-crucifying him in this way. They're thorns in his side, they're thorns in his crown, and we have to do something to fix it. Now, Saint Silouan the Athonite said, if you have love of God, you must also have love for your neighbor, because God is love. Okay, but also in the New Testament tells us, if you see something that's wrong, you tell the person that it's wrong. Because if you don't tell the person can keep sinning. If you observe it and see it, tell him that he's sinning so he can fix it. If you do not tell him, you will lose your soul, because he is lost. You will lose your soul, and he will lose his soul. But if you tell him, and he doesn't fix his problem, you will not lose your soul, because you did not tell him. You did tell him. You will not lose your soul, but he will. If you tell him, and he fixes his problem, his sins, then of course you gain your soul, and he does as well. So it's a very important thing. If God shows us that something is wrong, we have to tell that person out of love for him, and we have to fix things in the church out of love for God's house. Now, neighbor includes not only our friends, but also those with whom we disagree, even those we dislike. Christ did not discriminate in his love, as he teaches us. Love has no limits. It does not depend on whether someone is a friend or an enemy, but on the love of God that dwells in our hearts. In the Gospel of Matthew, Christ himself tells us, you have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. Who told you to love only your neighbor and hate your enemy? And Christ, our God, continues. He said, but I say to you, love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you. Matthew 5:43-44. Here Christ makes it clear that love has no limitations, nor can it be defined by human perceptions. This command is direct and goes beyond the logic of the world, calling us to love even those who wrong us and those with whom we do not agree. Christ himself, with his sacrifice on the cross, gave the most vivid example of this love. When suffering the most horrible punishment and the most extreme hatred from humanity, he prayed to his Father, saying, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Luke 23:34. This saying shows the supreme love of Christ for his enemies and the exhortation to do the same. And the Christian Orthodox faith is not a simple way of life or a religion that gives us a set of rules. It's a constant movement towards God, through which we recognize our weakness and become witnesses of his infinite love. If we do not understand this truth and try to defend a faith that we have not experienced, then we will sink into a false piety that will do more harm than good. The text of Bishop of Limassol dedicated to it those who consider themselves defenders of orthodoxy. There is no worse kind of people than the pious. He recorded a speech. There is no worse kind of people than the pious who consider themselves defenders and continuers of the Orthodox faith without even having experienced it. If you love your neighbor, you do not condemn him. If you love God, it's not possible not to love your neighbor. The man who loves God, as a natural result of the love of God, has love for his brother. We go on pilgrimage, we fast, we pray, we confess, we light our candles, we read the lives of the saints. That is why we do everything, to love Christ. Now that is the mistake. The mistake is that unfortunately we say that we do all these things to become good people and better people, and there is a great deception. It is a step that we all stumble on. Because of the church was intended to make us better people, then there would be no reason to have a personal relationship with Christ, nor would there be a reason for Christ to come into the world. A relationship develops within the church, a personal relationship of man with Christ, not with the teaching of Christ, not with the gospel. The gospel is something that helps us reach the love of Christ. When we reach the love of Christ, the gospel is not needed. They are not needed at all. All of this stops. Only the relationship of man with God remains. This is the difference between the church and religion. Religion teaches you to do your duties just like the pagans did. Example, when we went to pilgrimage, we worship, we put our money in the box, we lift our candles, our oils, I know, our petitions, our names, our offerings, everything. These are religious duties, but our hearts have not changed at all. The time of duty is over and we're the same as before. Ready to attack the other, ready to protest against the other, ready to be sour again as before. Our hearts do not change. We do not acquire the relationship with Christ because we are simply satisfied with duties, religious duties. And these people, religious people, are the most dangerous kind of the church. These religious people are dangerous. May God protect us from them. The Mount Athonian once said that I was performing a service, and when we were saying, Lord, save the pious, he jokingly said, Lord, save us from the pious. Meaning God protect you from religious people, because a religious person means a perverted personality who's never had a personal relationship with God. He simply does his duties towards him, but he has had no such relationship with him, and God says nothing about this person. And I confess to you from my experience as a bishop that I have not seen worse enemies of the church than religious people. And this is according to the Bishop of Cyprus, Athanasius. Please leave your comments, and thank you for your support. Please support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support, and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.